Well, good evening and welcome. We're really glad so many of you came out. I know the snow picked up, so we're especially glad you were willing to come out. I'm Lori Hunter. I'm the superintendent of schools here for both the Concord and Concord Carlisle schools. Our purpose tonight is to open a dialogue. As you know, we've shared out a couple of incidents here at the school where students made threats against other students, and we're happy to give you a little bit more information. There's always a limit to what we can give and what we can't, and we can talk on that a little bit tonight as well. I thought it was also important, in addition to those incidents in isolation, to talk in a bigger picture way about safety and security. So you can see we've gathered some of our local folks who support us on that. But at the same time, I can't have that conversation without talking about the wellness of our kids, because to me, that's the urgent issue, and this is just one way that plays out. It plays out in lots of ways, and sometimes lower keys, sometimes more significant, anywhere in between. And I think as a school system, that is our burning conversation, to talk about our kids and figuring out how we open that dialogue with them. So we've tried to balance the folks that are going to talk with you. I'm going to let them take turns talking 5 or so minutes each. I saw myself as sort of cleanup on whatever else you wanted to talk on, and then we just want a question and answer session and really make this a dialogue. All right? Great. Who's going first? We starting with you, Scott, coming down the line?
Mike was going to start.
Oh, Mike.
Well,
all right,
I
go
will
ahead.
cede the floor to the district
Oh,
attorney. No, it's your house, it's your house. Okay, sure, I guess I'll
All right,
start
Mike.
then. So, hello everybody, thank you for coming. I'm Mike Mastrula, as the sign says here. I'm the principal of the school. Just want to talk briefly about just school safety in general. And, you know, it's very cliche, but, you know, it is paramount. It is the most important thing. And when a parent sends their son or daughter off on the bus, or if they're driving themselves to school, carpooling, or if they're being dropped off by mom or dad, at the end of the day, they just want them to return home safely. And so that we take the responsibility of 1,272 kids in the building, keeping them safe. We take that responsibility very seriously. I have 2 children of my own that are in the other room there right now, so you know, I think about school safety quite a bit. You know, we're very lucky as a town that we have school resource officers now in multiple buildings. Very lucky to have Scott here with us, and not only just for the safety aspect, but just building relationships between the police and the student body is really important. In terms of the school safety, you know, even this facility, which is nearly $100 million, was built with safety in mind. And there's some really unique safety features that we have here that help keep the kids safe. And the most important thing that, and the idea of keeping kids safe, we talk about it quite a bit, is the relationships between the adults and kids, and to make sure that that every kid has at least one adult they can go to in the school. And I don't think we're batting 1,000, but I think we're pretty close. We have several meetings each week where kids are the sole focus of the meeting. One is a guidance meeting, another one is a clinical meeting. And really what we're doing there is identifying kids that are struggling in maybe academic or maybe socially, some social emotional issues, or there may be some behavior issues, and the point is that we're talking about this often to make sure that that kids, whether they're just not doing well, not performing well academically, perhaps there's something going on at home, or you know, or worse, they could harm themselves or somebody else. And so Scott and I, along with the other high school administrators, we work very closely together. We talk about kids a lot. And it's unfortunate that this is now the reality in which we live, where the potential for school shooting is there. And it has happened. It's very rare. Certainly you have a much higher probability of getting killed in a car accident. We all know that. But at the end of the day, you know, this is not something we should have to worry about when we come to school. But we do. It is the reality of the situation. And, you know, the harsh reality is, no matter where you are, a subway, a mall, or a school, the chances are if somebody wants to do harm, they can. And so it's very important that we live the motto that we use often when we talk about school safety, and that is, if you hear something, say something. Statistically, it has shown that with each school shooting or each when there's harm done in the school, for the most part, somebody was aware. And what we've seen is kids are willing to come forward, and they are willing to share the information. Oftentimes, they wait way too long. And part of that is because it's not a perfect calculus. They're trying to figure out whether or not this is somebody who might hurt themselves or somebody else, or what they're saying is real. There are signs there. They're not doing well in school. They're pulling away socially, et cetera. And we are lucky that we have good relationships with kids, and oftentimes they do share that information, but sometimes we find out the information is weeks or months old, and that's, that is concerning. So I think I took more than my 5 allotted, and I'm happy to answer questions and dive in where appropriate.
Very good.
Do you want to take?
Well, I'll go first. Go through
Yeah,
the panel.
if it's okay, we'll have everybody speak, and then we'll look back to questions. So who'd like to go next?
Well, I'll jump in.
thank you.
So, good evening. I'm Joe O'Connor. I'm the chief of police here in town. You'll hear a little more from Scott Camilleri, who's the school resource officer here in the high school. But I just want to give you briefly our philosophy at the police department, our thoughts on safety, and some of the things that we do. Everything we do at the police department is through partnerships. And we have a strong partnership with the school, all the schools, the administration, and the district attorney's office, and local mental health practitioners as well. In most of the cases that we come involved in, there is some type of nexus to mental health issues. And one of the things is that this town, Concord, has always believed in justice, and we've the first places in the Commonwealth to have restorative justice, where people in this community have said we want to make people whole, whether they create harm or they harm was done onto them. And in the school environment, we're dealing with adolescents. And anyone that looks at any of the data on the development of the adolescent brain, particularly with young men, I have 3 sons who have made it well into their 20s. I can tell you it's difficult, those of you that have teens in the room. So we know that they're not going to always make good decisions. And we need to be there to try to support them and get them through situations, whether it's everyday situations, the pressures of studying and performing in class, or those that are on the edges who Mr. Mastrula just talked about, who need to reach out for someone for help. I can tell you, Scott Camilleri has been school resource officer about, 15 years now, Scott?
Keeps me young.
Yeah, 15 years, and he develops really strong relationships with the young people and with staff. The 2 recent incidents that occurred, without getting into detail with them, the system worked. People came forward, and within minutes, those young people were removed from the classroom, appropriate action taken by the school, and the police do an investigation. And what I do want people to understand, in 2018, there was criminal justice reform, and it even tightened even further what we can speak about and how we can bring people into the court. But we confer with the district attorney's office, her experts, with just about every case that's appropriate to go, that may need to go into court, and to see how it goes there, or if it goes there. And there's things quite often now that we can't explain to people. With the juvenile age is now under 18. That was a recent change. So we would have offenders that were 17 that were considered adults in the past, and that information is public information when individuals like that are of that age are arrested. But with juveniles, we can't put out that information. We do recognize that the public does want to know what happens, and some of the calls that I get, people want to know, was someone arrested? And we sometimes we can't answer certain questions, but our goal is not to arrest. There are other ways to get people into the court system or into the healthcare system, and that's what we tried to do. In just about all juvenile cases, arrest is the last thing that we want to do unless there is an act of violence that is going on at that time. So we can use the summons process, we can referrals through the schools for mental health assistance, but that is our philosophy. Our offices just about 80% of our officers are put through crisis intervention training. And the Obama administration is put out some pillars that police should strive for. The national goal is 10% of police departments. We're at about 80%. So we are very cognizant of mental health issues, and we work with the schools on a regular basis to try to address those issues and get students. Some may not belong any longer in this environment, but find them the proper environment to still be successful. Everyone comes back to our community at some point, and we want to see these young people get through these situations that they deal with and come back to our community and be functioning at a better level when there's a problem. And I guess that's probably a good time to introduce our district attorney, Marion Ryan, who is really a strong partner. You'll see her all around the county on a regular basis. I don't know how many meetings we cross paths with the chiefs of police in the county, but she is a resource that I can call on at any time of day, and she's there to pick up the phone and provide me guidance, or just to make sure that we're on the same track, her and her team. So just Marion Ryan.
Thank you, Chief. And the Chief is right. You know, one of the best assets that we have in Middlesex County is that partnership that we have built. The long-standing relationships. You know, it's always difficult to go into some place where something has happened and be introducing yourself to the people that are involved. We never need to be doing that because we have those relationships built already, both with the chiefs of police, with our fire departments, with the superintendents. We come together at least once a year, police chiefs, fire chiefs, and superintendents, to talk about these issues, make sure we know each other, make sure we're doing what we need to be doing to keep people safe. And I echo what you heard from the principal. I had 2 kids in school, and there is nothing more frightening than hearing something that's happened in your town or the town where your kid's school is, and you might be many miles away at work and just being panicked. So I know that feeling in the pit of your stomach, and I want the answer right now. And that is our first priority. When we get these threats, and unfortunately we have them virtually every week in one of the 54 cities and towns across the county, the first thing that we are looking at is the safety piece. What do we need to do right now to make sure people are safe? And that is going to be everybody's goal. What's the immediate need that we have? And, you know, we spend a lot of time looking at things in the training piece about all of our facilities. Across Middlesex County, we have 1.6 million people. Every single day, we have 250,000 kids from kindergarten to 12th grade that go to school. We look at those schools as places like malls, big workplaces, all of that we have to be always thinking about. You know, one of the things that we are very careful about is just things like making sure that police and fire departments have floor plans for every school. You know, if they do a renovation at a school, we have to know. If something happens and a child is texting out, for instance, I'm in the library or I'm in whatever, we have to know from outside where that is. So there's a lot of that work that goes on all the time to be prepared on the safety piece. There is a lot of work that goes on talking about what you heard a reference to. Everybody knows and has seen on television, something bad happens, and you see the 300 people who knew one little piece and no one connected those dots. We do a lot of work to try to break down those silos and connect the dots and figure out who's going to know what piece, who can share what with what other pieces. And there are restrictions. The chief mentioned, you know, the law as far as especially juveniles, what can be shared. There's a lot of things that can't be shared because of HIPAA. So, for instance, there may be things in people's physical or mental health situation that we just don't know and that people can't share that come to light later on. And we really know that and work around those pieces of it. So when we have something happen, the first concern is obviously, how do we get everybody safe? That's all we're going to be focused on at that point. Where's the person who made that threat? Is that a viable threat? What's happening to everybody else? The second piece, once we're certain of the safety, is why did this happen? Have we identified the person? The number one reason that something has happened that we see, and then now hundreds and hundreds of these cases, is usually some combination of some mental health issue, some bullying issue, and maybe something going on that we didn't really know about, or the school didn't necessarily really know about, something going on outside in that student's life. There may be some tumultuous things going on at home, whatever it is. That's typical. Less frequent, but something that certainly does occur, is it was some sort of a joke. In some ways, that's the piece that is easier to deal with, you would think of, but it's been hard to get that message across. You know, we all know that you don't go to the airport and stand in line and make a joke about you've got a bomb in your sneaker or whatever. People just know that. So one piece of it is we need to be communicating that message to kids as well. That those kinds of things that they may mean as a joke, no one at school is going to take that as a joke. These are your kids. We can't afford to take that as a joke. So, you know you won't get to go where you're trying to go at the airport if you make a joke like that. We need to be driving the message home as well that you're not going to get to the success you're trying to get to academically or in school if you're making those kind of threats. And then, back to the piece about, which is the much, much more common, there's something else going on with this child. We want, first of all, for this never to happen again, and we want to address the underlying issue. In Middlesex County, we are fortunate. We have a very robust mental health care system that we are connected to. We have a lot of diversion programs. We're going to be trying to figure out what was going on. Why did this student do this? And how do we prevent that from happening again? Is it they are in need of some kind of services from someone outside in the community? Do they need services at the school? Do they need to be in another situation as far as schooling? So we're going to be looking to do all of that. As the chief said, it's not our goal to be arresting people and charging them in connection with it, because that's usually not what's really warranted. Sometimes, for any number of reasons, consistent with our obligation to protect the public safety, charging somebody is where we end up. So, for instance, we clearly have somebody in need of services. We have parents who might be resistant to getting that child services. We cannot do nothing given where we are. So we may end up charging that person, bringing them into the juvenile court system and trying to address that. That is a last resort for us. The second challenge that we face in terms of that is what you charge people with. So there's really sort of two crimes that generally apply to this. One is just the crime of threats. That is more difficult to prove than people realize because it requires a specific threat intended to be communicated to the target of that threat. So a lot of times what gets said is some sort of broad conversation, or I said it, I was yelling it to myself, saying it to myself in the bathroom. Well, it's going to be very difficult to prove that that's actually a threat under Massachusetts law because I didn't necessarily intend it to be communicated to the person I was making the threat for. So that's one issue we're thinking about. The other easier crime to prove, or at least to charge, is making a bomb threat, because that's pretty self-explanatory. One of the problems and one of the things that we are doing to change that is right now, that statute was obviously passed to protect us against, people saying there's a bomb at the airport or something like that. And as a result, it can only be prosecuted in the Superior Court, and it only carries a state prison sentence. There's no other option. That's not going to be typically, even in the case where we have to charge somebody, that's usually not ever where we would be going. So we have just this session, our office has filed a piece of legislation that would allow us to, in a circumstance where it was warranted, to prosecute that case in the district court and to allow for a judge to impose a probationary sentence or a suspended sentence if that was appropriate. So we're never going to be looking to charge a 14-year-old in Superior Court and have that case come through the Superior Court for 3 years. So, but right now we don't have an option. If this legislation passes, it will allow it, if it's appropriate, to charge that case in the district court. So that's kind of what we have available if we get to that point. But what we want to be doing is figuring out what happened and making corrections in that person. The other piece that I think is always difficult, and just last week we faced this in another school district, is unfortunately what we tend to see is these incidents tend to happen in clusters. So there's always the challenge, and it's for the school as well as for police departments. Sometimes the more information you're releasing, especially about the specifics of it, the more you see them happening. So we have a school district not very far from here that was fulfilling its, obviously you want parents to know what happened, right? Or your child comes home and says, we spent the whole day in the library today. Well, you want to know why they were put in the library, why the police were there. But there is a real balance between how much information do you give out, and then how often do you create something else happening? And districts have chosen to treat that differently and to make those distinctions based on particular incidents. But the primary goal is always going to be, what's the safety issue right now? And then what are we doing about the person we've identified as having made that threat? So I'll be happy to take some more questions, but I think that's sort of the overview of what we're looking at.
Thank you. Scott, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so Scott Camilleri, as you can tell, the school resource officer, the past 15 years, been in Concord for 25. I just want to let you know, Mike and his administration takes school safety seriously. This is not, a casual conversation. And Mike and the 2 assistant principals, we meet either Thursday morning or Friday morning, and we meet just like he meets with his guidance counselors and his clinical staff. And it might be a 5-minute meeting, could be a 15-minute meeting. If there's a lot going on, it might be a half-hour meeting. But we go over safety, what's going on in the schools, what have you heard, what's going on. It could be casual, it could be more formal meeting. So we do on an ongoing basis. And then, of course, I'm here in the building most of the time, so we run into each other all the time, working with Mike and the assistant principals. As District Attorney Ryan said, it is a hard line when we talk about joking. When someone throws a off-the-cuff remark, I was only joking. I will say, I think we do a good job here when they transition from elementary to middle school. When we talk about, we move into the Alice protocol. I say in our assembly with our 6th grade students and review it through, we don't joke about school threats. We don't joke. The kids hear this. And I always bring up, the bomb. You can't yell bomb in the airport. You don't yell fire in a movie theater. You don't talk about school, school shootings or shooting up a school, et cetera, like that. I introduced that at the middle school, and the kids know about it, and they take it seriously. Because I've heard stories where kids have moved in, and kids have talked about it, they say, oh, no, we don't talk like that in here. So the kids buy into it, but we don't mention that stuff here. We don't use that type of, and I'm saying we don't make them paranoid about their speech, but they know that we don't, school violence is not a joking matter. So so the hard part is, and then as you said, you can't really, when we're investigating a threat, we don't let a lot of information out there because we're trying to gather who has the information and is it correct and make it, what's true, what's really out there and what's exaggerated, what's factual, what's, not facts, reality versus rumor. So it's a lot of times we want to find out what people know and not put our own information out there yet until we find out who knows what and where and when type of deal. So, and I'll wait for the question period after that.
Great, thank you. Tom, do you want to go next?
Sure. Tom Judge, I'm the fire chief. The fire department has a completely different role in this. We're not in the schools like the police are. In the elementary schools, we have a fire prevention person who goes in and talks to the younger kids about fire prevention issues. On the topic of violence, we have a completely different role, and it's more of a supporting role. We're training to mitigate the damage in the event that something unfortunate happens, and we're training. We're in a completely new world for the fire service. We're training in those skills. We're having to get new equipment, different types of equipment that firefighters never imagined that they would ever have to deal with, but a new type of protective equipment. And then we're training with the police department and police agencies in ways that we never did before. We go to calls every day together, all day long. but we rarely go to calls where we have to work side by side to complete the same mission. And that's the sort of thing that we're doing now, and we're training with them. Our training officers are working together to develop curriculum. And I can tell you that in Concord, we are very fortunate that the police agency and the fire agency have very close ties and work exceptionally well together. And that's, I believe that's from, the top to the bottom. And like I say, it's a new world for the fire service, but I want to assure you that we are doing everything in the background that you don't see to be prepared for something that we never want to see happen.
Thank you. Ann, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, I'm Ann Westcott. I'm a clinical social worker, and I've been in the field for about 30 years. And I think I have an odd role in the sense that I'm not at all involved in the incidents and evaluating the safety and responding. However, I do, and the mental health world is very involved in oftentimes treating both people who will, and adolescents who will make these kinds of statements, and also adolescents who get identified and then referred back into the mental health for support. I think the theme that I really wanted to pick up on is that one of the most powerful mitigating factors is relationship, partnership, and connection. And oftentimes when we have kids who are either putting their distress external by threatening others or putting their distress internal by threatening themselves, we often look at it as similar root causes, but it's being directed two different ways, that frequently they're very isolated. And relationships with caregivers, parents, teachers, staff, and by the time they're in adolescence, really relationships with their peers are so important. And oftentimes these kids are really struggling, feeling belonging, connection. And so I'm sure there'll be a lot of thoughts and questions about how the mental health side of things can help support kids and identify and collaborate to prevent things from happening. But in many ways, we're bound by the same HIPAA rules as everyone else around confidentiality, and only at a point where we really see risk to self or others do we then get active. And sometimes these kids haven't been identified yet that are struggling, and these crises are what alerts everyone that they're hurting and they need support and help.
I just have a quick question. The HIPAA rules, does that prevent you from talking among your groups together across departments?
We have a way of talking and checking out risk factors without violating confidentiality, and getting second opinions and reaching out for feedback. Yeah, definitely.
Can I just ask, if somebody asks a question, just say your name and if you have just your role, just parent, kids in the district?
Sure, yeah. My name is Steve. My daughter's in 7th grade. They go so fast.
They do.
So I just wanted to kind of round all that out with a little bit of information on some of the proactive ways we're trying to address all the different components of this. We take the safety very seriously. We run Alice drills at the middle and high schools both. Scott comes over, and a lot of other officers come over, often from other communities. And the kids are trained in how to respond if they think there's a school shooter here. And Alice really empowers. The gift of Alice was years ago in the Columbine days as administrators. We were saying lockdown, and that was the only option teachers and kids were given. Alice has been an empowering change to give them choice, help them see what the different options might be, and then empower them to say whatever that choice is you make the safest choice you can in the environment, which sometimes means it's running or barricading or different options other than just everybody in one corner of the room and essentially waiting. So we work really hard at that. We have trained all of the elementary teachers. We're having a lot of discussion about what we want to have the kids actually engage with, but we want to make sure the teachers are prepared. And then on the mental health side and how do we identify kids so we're getting to them earlier, right? That's got to be the key, because by the time you're so bottled up that the way it's coming out is in those kinds of statements, we need to open that dialogue up. So we're trying a lot of new things. Response to intervention is a formula that's been in our educational world for a long time, and it's all about intervening early. And it's been under an academic model for a long, long time. Districts everywhere, really, the last 10 years trying to tackle that. So we find reading issues early and intervene, and math issues early. Well, now we're into the social emotional. So we were really fortunate this year. We're working with McLean and Harvard. They've got a new tool. So if you have a high school freshman, they've already participated in this, where they're giving us feedback on an electronic screener that asks them how they're feeling about different aspects of themselves and school and their peers, and helps us start to be able to identify who needs intervention. Because as much as we want kids to be connected to adults, and we work really, really hard at that, and we feel like we're quite successful, there are going to be kids in a teenage environment where they're not going to express that to us. And that plays out in tons of ways. That's probably a whole nother night on all of our worries and stress in kids. But the identity of who they are so that we can intervene and open a dialogue is absolutely the goal. While we create an environment where kids will tell us when one of their peers is in crisis, or even hinting at crisis. And I think these two incidents, we're learning a lot. We're trying really to reflect on what happened and how and why, and see where, as a school, we need to either work on individual pieces or bigger picture aggregate pieces. I think Mike's right. In our debriefing, there were kids who knew earlier, and how do we make them comfortable, and how do we ensure that we respond in a way that we intervene so that those kinds of statements from kids don't happen. The one gift I felt like we had, and it's not a gift, probably is not the right word, but through both situations, we had individual kids that we knew who we were talking to, we knew who we needed to intervene on, both the child making the threat and those who were involved in being threatened. It could know that we were getting engaged with the right people. My daughter's high school last spring, I have a freshman in college and a high school junior, they had a random thread in the bathroom that says graduation rehearsal is going to get shot up, and it's very hard to manage that. The administrators can't go figure, there's no cameras in bathrooms because of privacy, so tracking that down is impossible, and the whole place went into kind of a crisis mode. Nobody went to school the next day, except my poor kids. We're watching Netflix. Do you think we can come home? I think we were able to manage to know who we were talking to, and in that way hopefully contain and reassure people. The hardest decision we have is what to tell all of you. I don't know that I can totally contain the discussions we have to try to share how hard it is to know when and what to share. I, by far, will always err on the telling you things so that we build a relationship of trust with you, that you're not hearing stuff on the street that you can't believe we didn't share. The challenge in that is sometimes I'm sharing things that we are still really actively investigating, and we aren't even sure exactly what happened. We have this much fact, but there's this much story to figure out. And I'd say in these situations there was some of that. So that's really hard, because those are trust relationships that are so critical to our success with you and your kids. But sometimes that means we can heighten your anxiety because we share something that happened while we're still sorting it all out. And that was some of the frustration I heard in people. Why can't you tell me why? And the truth was, while we were taking those calls, we didn't even know what had exactly happened. We knew this much. And then I guess the final piece, we're here all to support the kids, and some of the hardest decisions we have to make is how we respond, and I think some of these folks have said that, how we respond to the child who makes the threat. We are very aware of the need to keep kids safe, and I assure you that was our first response, safety. Those kids were in this office within seconds of us knowing anything might be happening. Both kids are still out of school, and we're working with families to figure out what that looks like. And as the chief said, reentry will become part of the discussion at some point. Contain and manage the safety, but then how do we support the kids in general? We want to be sure that everybody comes out of this well. Child in crisis, children being threatened, aggregate school safety. So we've got a lot we've learned, a lot more to debrief. So if there's that little silver lining of, crisis breeds opportunity, I think we've tried to really capitalize on that. So we're really, really thrilled so many of you came out tonight, because this is a community discussion. for sure, and how we work with our kids and make this place the sanctuary that we all want to be sure that it is.
I think probably, just to follow up on what the superintendent said, we have kids. I feel sick to my stomach when I hear the Alice piece, thinking of my child making that choice. Would they barricade, would they run, or would they fight? So that being said, know that that's in everybody's mind. The second piece of it is, because it is such an emotional situation, obviously, again, especially you're in Boston, you're wherever, you're working, you're out of town working, and you're hearing this story, we don't have the same kinds of conversations that we're having tonight. That's really our hope with this, is that, if something were to happen, at least you're already armed with some of the reasons that these things can't happen or why we can't disclose everything. Because I've been at a lot of the schools when we've had this, and the conversation about, well, HIPAA prevents us from telling you this, or we can't tell you because we're still trying to investigate it, is much more difficult to communicate in that situation. So our hope is that you kind of have that piece to begin with. And the third piece is, and one of the things that we've learned, we have a school program that we go out and we do with the kids, and it's about talking to parents and sharing things with parents and whatever. And just as a parent, probably the biggest thing that I have learned from that program is we do it with real scenarios for the kids. So we will do some real scenario drawn from a real case, and then we talk about, the premise of the training is decision-making is like any other skill in life. You have to practice. So this is a scenario that you are likely to face in your middle school or high school. What would you do? And we divide the room up into different answers, and we ask the kids to go stand with what their answer would be. In many of them, it's not hard to figure out. I'm the district attorney. I'm usually there with the police chief. It's not hard to figure out what the right answer would be. Would you get in the car with your friend who's been drinking? You probably can figure out what the right answer should be. I am always surprised at how many people will go to what is clearly the not safe answer. And then when we talk about it, probably the number one reason people will often do that is, I wouldn't tell my mother that, my best friend's brother came to pick us up having been drinking, because that's my best friend, and my mother would say, you can't be with them anymore. Or I wouldn't tell my mother about what happened, because my mother would just go crazy and call the school and all of that. The same thing that every single one of us, when we were kids, worried about. So I think that's an important piece of the relation, the wanting people to tell. It's very frightening if your child says their friend has been making some threats, or their friend has been cutting themselves, or something's been happening. And I think as parents, we need to really have that sense of, if I want them to tell me, I know I go from 0 to 100 in 60 seconds when it comes to my kids, really trying to just check that, because they're going to tell you a lot more in that, if they really feel like your response is going to be measured and not embarrass them, but still keep them safe. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Hi, I'm Sarah. I have a son here in sophomore. I just want to say, I don't have a really nice way to say this, just I think your messaging failed us as a community. By the time I got to the third email, I'm like, there must be a problem. It was so vague. I know HIPAA this, privacy that. I don't need details. I don't need to know who it was. I don't need to know if they got arrested. I don't mind about that. I just need to know if it's serious. And I couldn't tell from these messages whether it was serious. Then I get my son one day, I'm like, oh, by the way, I heard there was something at your school. He's like, huh? So whatever you told the students, apparently some of them, I know some are a little more in tune, didn't think there was a problem. And so I just came here tonight, and I still have no idea what happened. Is this a gun threat, a bomb threat? And I was hoping someone could illuminate me. I understand, folks, you probably can't, but maybe someone else here knows more than I do, because I know nothing about this.
So I will say, in fairness, it is challenging in the very beginning to
I
determine.
understand that, so at least now I understand that you have a lot of reasons why you couldn't tell us what happened.
Yeah.
The fact that as a parent who lives here, I grew up in a different country, we have different gun laws. Should I leave Concord and move away, or should I just not worry, which is what I've been doing, is not worrying. I still even don't know what level of a threat this is or will be, because there's no information.
Yeah, well, but the messages were shared were pretty direct. I mean, it did talk about the threat, and it was the
You know,
kid.
saying, did someone bring a gun to school? Did they plant a bomb?
Yeah. So no, nobody brought a gun to school. There was threats made against the school, and there was never a weapon, and I don't believe we were ever in imminent danger. But, you know, these are things that need to be taken very seriously, and things were said that shouldn't be said, and it involved doing harm to others, including killing people. But the messages, you know, we do have some challenges in terms of what can be shared. But, you know, if you go and read the superintendent and what I said, they were fairly direct about the
We
threat.
went to check them today before you came here.
So I had a letter draft, the second time, I was equally frustrated the second time, and I had a different version of that letter that the school attorney took one look at, and we have FERPA is our version of their HIPAA, and said you are completely violating that child's rights, and stripped all the details out. And so there's a really challenging balance for us. We share your frustration, we understand where it's coming from. What we're able to share is that there were threats involving shooting, both incidents were involving shooting, there were no weapons here, and that we felt what we needed to do was be sure to intervene with the kids who were in that level of distress to make those comments. If there had been weapons here or something bigger and different than that, I believe fully that it would have included more of that kind of information. But I share your frustration, but we also have to live by the law, and that's where we were boxed in. So that's why you're here tonight, so we can try to make this a conversation and share a little bit more where we can.
So you can't say there's
Just-
no weapon?
We can say there's no weapon, so if that wasn't clear in the letter, we will certainly review that and be sure that it is clear going forward.
If you think about.
And if I just may elaborate on that one quick second. And I fully recognize too that what we're asking for is a tremendous amount of trust.
Correct.
In that, you know, this message goes out, it's not as though it's business as usual for us. I mean, it was literally 1 month where we did nothing but deal with this in some capacity. And so we are all over it, we are on top of it, and we are sharing what we can, but we're doing everything we can to make sure the school is safe every day. But the reality is there is no guarantee, and that's not just about this specific event. I mean, there's been these horrific events that happen at a movie theater that, you know, we have parents coming and dropping stuff off here every day. They get buzzed in. They don't go through a metal detector. We don't pat them down. There is a level of trust that we have in a free and open society. I do think Concord is a very safe place, but safety is relative in 2019.
So if I could just jump in, I know there's more questions. If an email is sent by the superintendent or the principal, something occurred that's highly unusual in the school, and I think you should know that they're taking it seriously. But what I will say, as Mike just said, this is a very safe community, but you mentioned moving out of town. Gun violence in this country is a serious problem. You know, we've been very fortunate in our community, we don't have it. But I want everyone to understand, the system in these 2 cases worked. Young people went to a responsible adult or went to another young person who brought that forward, that we got the information. 2016, we had another threat. There was an arrest in that case, and at that time, we were able to share that information. But the system of communicating and the school staff and school resource officers building trust, that what works. And what also works too is having that same trust for young people to be able to tell their parents or tell parents' friends that, because everything doesn't always come through the school, and people got to have that level of comfort if they have an idea or something might be going on, to share that. I will tell you that information that goes out that you might hear, if we ran that old thing where I started the story here, and by the time it got to the end of the room, we have a totally different story. So, you know, rumors that you hear may have a little bit of factual information in it, but it's most likely not what occurred.
The other piece to that question is, I think, obviously what everybody always wants to know is this a serious threat? Or you see every time something happens, the question everybody has, are people in danger? We start with the premise that every threat is serious, and there's a danger until we know there isn't a danger. And sometimes that takes us a long time. So we are always going to take seriously the responsibility we have for the kids or for whoever it is in the community. So, some threat comes in over the internet. You and I both know that's probably not a terribly credible threat, but we're going to start with the premise that that's a serious threat until we've worked backwards and figured out that that's not. So, and that takes a long time. And I know, and every time something happens, and the chief knows, and the press comes, the first question is everybody safe? And you will notice unless we know, we are always saying, we don't know at this time, we're unable to say that people should exercise caution. We're always going to do that, because that's the truthful answer. And I would rather have people be being more careful than say, oh yeah, it's good, and then something else happens.
Ruthie?
Hi, I'm Ruthie. I have a daughter in high school and a son in the middle school. So I'm glad that you're having this conversation. I have two comments. One is, tomorrow night is curriculum night, and in June there's like another transition night. This kind of conversation maybe should be part of parents entering the high school. Just to have it now when there was a crisis, God, nothing serious happened. But these kind of things happen usually after something terrible happened. So never having it before something terrible happened, but maybe it becomes part of, if there's whatever, 50 of us here, there's a squall outside, right? But tomorrow night, curriculum night, there'll be 100, and the night that the transition for parents from middle school to high school, there'll be 200. So that's a captive audience. So I would recommend thinking about this conversation being integrated into the parent and child going up to the middle school or the high school. I actually had the opposite response in my house, where my daughter came home and said, there was a list, right? And we knew kids on the list. And I am like, freaking out because, like everybody knows who's on the list. And the email, of course, didn't respond to that. So my thought back, to my principal is, I wonder if the kids understand the seriousness of it, right? I mean, there was a list. It was kind of like, who's going with who to the prom, and there was this list from some, kid. So my concern is that, because there is this problem with gun violence in our country, and it happens sadly so often, that I'm not sure the message to my family, to my, was that it was extremely serious.
Yeah, the balance is to figure out what you respond to. And so, the rumor mill, it is part of the equations. Oftentimes, there's a semblance of truth in there. Usually get divided by 2, sometimes 3 by the time it gets down. But, there was no list. And so, it's the superintendent or myself to put something out, reacting to that can be a challenge, and then the next rumor, and so it can be challenging. But I do recognize some of the frustration.
Charlie, I have 2 kids, seniors. A couple things. As far as bullying is concerned, you said that bullying, it sounds like it's often part of the equation. And I know that, like, in Carlisle, there's a lot of don't bully. I mean, it sounds like they do that in the middle schools and at the grade school level. Do you do it here?
We do, it is. It's part of the curriculum, and we talk about it quite often, including the first day of school. And, we talk about to the kids and to the parents, for that matter, at open house, that we're going to talk to you about the programming here, about the academic opportunities, all the clubs, all the arts, all these fantastic things. However, the baseline is that everyone's going to be kind to each other. That's the expectation. We're all going to be kind. Now, they're teenagers, and that doesn't always happen. That's just the reality of it. And we can't manage every squabble. But we can reiterate the need to treat each other with kindness. And oftentimes, one of the messages we try to share is, we have 1,272 kids, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religions, different race, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, we have one thing in common, it's we all come to this school. And life is hard enough, and we shouldn't be making life more challenging on one another. But it is difficult. And oftentimes, I think some of the, bullying is a term that's used quite often. And there's legislation around bullying, and so it's very rare that at the high school level that it results in bullying. But that doesn't mean it's appropriate what's going on. And so what we will uncover oftentimes when a kid does have a mild breakdown is they might be dealing with being teased as part of a friend group, and they take it every day with a smile and give it back and laugh. But inside, it's really eating them alive. And they don't want to show that it's their weakness, and they don't want to make a big deal of it, because the last thing they want is to be ostracized from a group. They just want to be connected. They need their friend group. And so that, I think, is part of the messaging that we need to deliver here, that needs to be reinforced at home, is you don't know what someone's dealing with outside of school, and you actually don't know how this is impacting them. And, it's not hard to be kind, to smile. And so that is a baseline and expectation, but.
So is that something you just do on the first day, or?
I mean, no, it's part of the health curriculum and bullying. But you're not just going to be able to get them in that. They take that as in the earlier grades. We try to do it through advisory, but we also try to do it just by making sure that we're keeping it as part of the conversation. That staff are keeping a very close eye on kids and relationships and how kids are being treated in class. And
I think you were waiting.
Yeah. I'm Renee, and I have a daughter who's in the sophomore last year and a son in middle school. And I have two questions. One is, my daughter similarly came home and was really, really shaken by this whole thing. She knew one of the kids that I guess was targeted, maybe not on the list, but had experience of a kid that came back after having left class and was really quite shaken. She did not know how to think about that. And then I think the other piece was access. How do we know they're safe? Because there was a perception someone had access to weapons. And that child who they thought had access came back. And to your point about the rumor mill, as a parent, you feel completely helpless, because how do you send your kid to school the next day? She's saying, I have midterms, she can't focus on midterms. And it feels a bit of a farce, right? Because you're like, you saw something, they were in the room when these kids were removed, so they're having a very visceral experience. And you're right, the other kids, to the extent they weren't paying attention or they were in different grades, weren't. And then they had this assembly, and I don't think they could have been in more different places. And so my question, I guess, is, how do you communicate with these kids who may have that real experience? And then can you communicate to us, what are you doing to keep them safe? I understand you have to be very careful about the words you use, but did someone have access? Nothing came into the school, but if a kid had access, what happens?
so I'll just speak very, very quickly, and I'm not going to speak about this individual case, to be perfectly honest. But anytime there's an issue with the student, we always want to know, is there access to weapons? Do they have weapons in the house? But people they can be licensed gun owners. But we always want to know, do they have access to weapons in the home? And is there any access to weapons outside of the home? And that would be part of an investigation.
And could I ask a question? If there is a threat coupled with a kid that has access, what happens?
That's part of the threat assessment that Mike and I do at the school, part of, the background of the student. First thing is find out what the student's like the school does their part. I find out if they have access to weapons. I do a check in the state system to see if they have firearms, license to carry, FID card. And then, so if I do have access to weapons, there is some sort of, maybe a threat, there's something going on, a low-level threat, a medium threat, and a high threat. That's how we decide threat assessment. There was no access to weapons for the main incident. There was no access to weapons. And going back to your thought about weapons and rumor mill, while we're trying to investigate this, there was 90 rumors going around. Some students had no idea what was even going on. Some parents said, yeah, I got the email, I didn't read it. So you're going from the deep end where some people, want to know everything, and there's some students and staff who, not staff, but students and parents who have no idea that it's even happening. But if your daughter, your son is in that, class, that something happened, or in that same area, then of course they're going to be more anxious about it. So and if you have a question or you hear a rumor, call me. I have school email, I have town email, send me an email. Scott, I need to, call me. Some parents have called me. Don't be afraid to call me. Hey, what's this room? What is going on? Or call the chief. Can I say that, chief?
I got many a call.
Because that's the rumors sort of fuel everything. I feel like the school, Mike and I in the school contained this when it happened, both instances, pretty quickly. Of course, you have to do your follow-up, and when you're doing the follow-up, they're teenagers, they talk, and things get taken out of context.
And I think you should know too is when we get information that someone may have been involved in something, the school resource officer or one of the detectives doing the investigation will reach out to not only the child, but the parent as well, let them know something is going on. Can't always give them all the facts and circumstances, and again, we're dealing with parents. We have some parents that will come in and they're very cooperative and help share information. We have other parents who say, we're not gonna talk to you, we don't talk to the police, our child is not going to speak with you at all. So we have, there's a wide spectrum of things. And, one of the things that we have to think about is we have to make sure that we are respecting the constitutional rights of all individuals that we're dealing with. And so investigations are not something, once the safety is determined, that people are safe, then we slow down our investigation and we make sure we're talking to people and getting as much information as we can. Because when I was a young investigator, the first thing someone told me was, don't believe what you think. And you have to move along and make sure you get all the information to make sure that we're presenting the right information to the district attorney, but also to the school as well. I mean, one thing that, someone asked a question about sharing information outside of HIPAA. We have a memorandum of understanding where we share information with the district attorney and with the school. So if we, take something, alcohol at midnight somewhere, we'll share that information with the school, those types of things. So we do share information on a regular basis.
Yeah. The one other thing I just want to follow up on, because what I hear, and I want to just stress this, no matter what the situation is, if your personal angst is so great that you or your child isn't comfortable being here, pick up the phone and call us, email us. Mike and I think we're on the phone, and these guys got calls too, but Mike and I, we didn't even answer email by email. We picked up the phone and called. I think we were on the phone for 5 days straight, 24/7 almost. We want to put that time in, and I know it mattered whether we got people all the way to be comfortable, but by the end of a conversation, I think maybe somebody in there was going to tell me I didn't get as far as I hoped, but I think people felt better than at least where they started, and felt that we wanted to know and that we heard. We need to know how that is impacting you. Without the feedback loop, we can't tell that. And especially in a situation like this, it had very individual impact on different people. So help us know that, because we want to know that. We want you to be safe and comfortable here. If your child needs support, we tried. We did sit and tried to predict sort of that web of which kids needed our intervention. We sat the next morning with the guidance department and made that list and tried to be sure we reached out to them and their families, and we knew we weren't going to get everybody. So please reach out to us. That's why we're here. The most important thing to us is your kids and their safety and your comfort with their safety. The rest of the learning doesn't matter if you don't feel safe at school. So I encourage you that we need that help. Don't ever hesitate, because it's just really, really important.
The other piece, if you haven't seen it this morning, the Boston Globe editorial is about the reaction that people have developed to incidents that happen in schools. And there is that, people have just gotten to, it's like, oh, it's another threat at school, I'm not reading the email. We know how that is. It talks about, for kids, for some kids now, especially the kids who are a little bit older, the juniors and seniors, unfortunately, that's become kind of a commonplace thing that may impact how they're reacting. I mean, it's an interesting reflection, because I always say when we do our training pieces, when you think about Columbine and what a major story that was, the reality right now is that in the United States, we have a fatal school shooting once a week. And usually, if you read the Boston Globe, usually where they're reported is in the national news blobs on the second page, inside the front cover. And if only one teacher dies or one student dies or whatever, that's what it gets. It gets one of those little stories. And that's something we need to be having a bigger conversation about, obviously, but that may very well be impacting how people respond to that. The second piece is one of the other tools in our toolbox for dealing with this now is in Massachusetts. We, just as of 6 months ago or so, we now have that red flag legislation, which says that if there is somebody in a house with access to weapons, we would hope it would be the family, but if not, others can petition the court to have those weapons returned. Because part of our investigation is obviously there may be a parent or an older sibling or a grandparent or somebody in that house who is licensed and has a weapon. We would hope they might see that there was a danger and want to be giving it to us. As the chief says, that is not everyone's reaction. So that red flag legislation does give us an opportunity to bring that to a question to a judge to say, we know this, 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 and this. There are 4 guns in this house. What should we be doing about that? So that's another tool in the toolbox for us.
Question?
Hi, my name's Carlisle. I have 2 kids in high school and 1 in middle school. Just what you said specifically, because again, rumor mill, we all heard various things, but we did hear that scenario laid out to us that one of the children had access, not in their own home, but in another home. And again, a lot of us have been here for many, many years. We know the people in the community. We know, the names that come up. This is credible to us. And what I'm concerned with is when you say, okay, we've made the child safe from a mental health perspective and that family is cooperating, what happens, like you're saying, you just started to address it with another family, even if it's hypothetical, even if that isn't what happened in this case. How much authority do you have when people are licensed to have a gun and it's, they're legally holding it, but a different child from outside might have access?
So depending on the facts and circumstances, I'm a person who signs the licenses in town. I can suspend or revoke that license and have the guns turned in or transfer it to a license, someone outside licensed.
Yeah.
I had a question about Jeff Collins' 2 kids at Sanborn, and a question about the Alice drills and making sure kids are prepared for the worst case. I got stories from my 2 kids, which means they're probably not very accurate in terms of what they told me what happened that day. I think it's great. I'm learning a lot tonight. I appreciate this evening, and I think doing the drills is fantastic. I did fire drills. We all did fire drills when we were younger, and I can tell the kids, oh, this is what you should do in a fire drill. Don't know what they should do in an Alice drill. And so our daughter described being in the mods, the outside units, and the teacher had left the class and the Alice drill was announced, and she said, yeah, we kind of did what we did in a fire drill. We just kind of walked out in front of the school. And I was like, that doesn't seem like a good idea. Now, again, they could have been told to do one thing and one thing and one thing and then gather at one point so everyone was present. Our reaction around the dinner table was, run for the woods, And then I bit my tongue and I said, well, I want to be sure that we're delivering a consistent message. So it would be helpful to know more about what they're learning at school so we can support what you're trying to teach them.
If I may say one quick thing, too. Yeah. I mean, I think when you can get out, you should get out. And I also think this is an important conversation. Their level of danger is less here than it is when they go to the mall. And, these are discussions that we should have with kids. You should always be aware of your surroundings. You should know where the exits are. You should make sure that you're paying attention when you're in a movie or what. And it's really terrible to say, but it is the reality in which the life that we're living in. And I don't know how often those conversations are having. We do drill here, and there are different scenarios. I'll let Scott take, but I think the walking out, probably not the best course of action. Running to the woods, I think that's good advice.
Yeah, so when we do the Alice assembly with the students, excuse me, we do say run, and run as far away as you can, don't worry. Here at the high school, we can text everybody back in, Mike can send a text out, it's over, and we do send a text out saying the drill's over, come out. When we did a sample.
Please come back.
Yeah,
Please come back to school.
They're all, the juniors and seniors are Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks. Yeah, at Starbucks. So at that day, it was a cold day that day, so it was cold, so we did tell the staff, if you're gonna evacuate, you don't have to run, far into the parking lot. Just go outside, stay there, let the officers, we have lots of officers who help during the drill, and the fire department also assists. We say, if you're gonna go outside, just say you would keep running. So hopefully they fled out. We don't want them to run during a drill because people trip and fall and get hurt. Some of the students do run or jog, but we had tried not to do that. But in real life, I tell them just run, get out, be a moving target, run to the woods, hide, whatever you have to do to survive type of thing. But that was a cold day, so they just stayed. That was one of our first critiques when we did it at the high school years ago. Well, you told us to stop in the parking lot. Well, yeah, because if you kept running, you'd all be at, like we said, Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, so we'd never come back. But, yeah, it's run, just get out. Does that help?
So just,
And I walk around, so you know, at the high school, Mike and I walk around, we have a detective dressed up as the bad guy. There's a little, Mike and I walk, I'm in my uniform that day, the detective's dressed up as the bad guy, he's described as the bad guy. The students don't know where the bad guy's gonna be. They know the drill's coming, because they always say, Officer Scott, we know the drill's coming, how come you don't surprise us? Well, you gotta do a balance, of course. They just don't know where to put them in. Here at the high school, I walk around with an air horn that represents the threat, gunshots, and we walk around and we see how the students and staff react. At the middle school, I clap real loud. Justin and I walk around with the detective, and we clap real loud, and some students say, we heard the clapping, we heard the air horn, and we barricaded, or we fled, or we heard it going away, so then we unbarricaded, and then we fled. So that's what we do for the part of the Alice drill.
so if I could, in the back there is our new middle school, school resource officer,
Stand up.
Officer Kevin Gina. So for your Sanborn kids, have a seat.
Can I add one thing to what Mike just
Of
said?
course.
I finally have a fire thing. Mike just pointed out that when your kids, and this extends to you as well, when you go into any place that you're not familiar with, a movie theater, a school library, someplace that is not your normal environment, look around and find out where the other exits are. Because when an emergency happens, whether it's, a shooting or whether it's a fire, no matter what it is, human nature is going to drive people back to the door they came in. So that's where, like in a fire, that's where a lot of tragedies happen because people can't get out. So I can't encourage you enough to share this message with your kids and really kind of try and do it yourselves. When you walk into a place where there are a lot of people, look around and make sure that you know alternative ways out besides the way you came in, because that's where everybody else is going to be going.
The other man.
Hi, Ann. I have a 6th and a 5th grader, 6th graders at Peabody. I think also it would have been helpful to have a little bit more information, having a younger child that was in elementary school and younger during a lot of the terrible events that happened at schools previously. We did a lot of Mr. Rogers-style conversations where it was minimized maybe with, we talk about information in as safe a way as we could. And then, although we knew an Alice training was coming, especially just sitting here hearing more in detail what it was like, I feel a little caught off guard. And when my daughter came home and talked about a lot of the things she'd heard about all the prior shootings and what went wrong and the carnage, she seemed okay having the information. I just wasn't prepared myself. So I think that would have been helpful to know up front, I think.
So that's a very good point. One thing I think everyone should realize, if you turn your TVs on or your radios on, kids hear everything and they listen to everything, and they know so much of the things that happen, all these tragedies, and they're sponges. And I'll go back to 9/11. My boys grew up after 9/11. They was sent home, run home from school, so they've grown up with terrorism. Is something that they see on TV, and it's something that they're used to hearing about. Unfortunately, this generation is hearing about school shootings all the time, and so quite often they're more prepared to talk about these things than some of the adults, because I look around the room, it's really foreign to us. When I was a kid, I don't ever remember a school shooting. It didn't occur, and now it's something that I'm reading every day. I'm reading some type of report that comes across my desk of something that's going on. So I just encourage you, and your kids better than we do, how much they can take and to talk about things, but give them those tips, to, like the chief just said, to look at the doors, to be educated and have those conversations with, if they have a question at a drill, go to a teacher or go to Officer Gina or Officer Scott and have those conversations, and hopefully they'll feel comfortable to, again, talking with an adult and be prepared.
In the back, yeah.
My name is Cheryl. I have my first just graduated from CCHS last year. I have an 11th grader here, an 8th grader at the middle school, and a 5th grader at Alcott. I have 2 comments and then a question. First comment about the trust is just to reiterate, yes, it absolutely is about trust. And I fully trust our staff, our administration, our local law enforcement, everybody. While at the same time, I completely understand, and that's part of the fear and I think the angst of a parent in these situations, which is that does not, as Mike Mastrula said, guarantee the safety of my child. So there is just, I think someone else mentioned, this helplessness factor that contributes to the rumor mill. Hopefully, I'm just giving you that perspective. We're presumably all here to try to understand where you're coming from more, and perhaps you can understand a little more from our comments and questions about where we're coming from too. And I know you're all parents too, so you know this already. The second thing is, I think the mall analogy, I know I've heard that before, and I don't think it's a fair one, only because there are no laws requiring me to take my child to the mall, or the movie theater, or even a large city. And even though the risk might be the same, the mall's a much more spread out, different place where everyone's not contained, and it's most likely not going to be on a personal level where one person sort of has it out for specific other people. So I feel like it's a very, very different situation. It's really difficult.
Do you mind if I answer that? Because I don't disagree at all. I guess the point I'm trying to make, and I'm obviously not doing a good job, and by the way, I might say one of your 4 kids might disagree. Maybe it should be a law that you have to take them to the mall. Just yeah, my point is I'm trying to make is that this is a safe place, but safety is relative in a free and open society. So the mall one is a terrible analogy, I agree. I actually think this is a much safer place because of the relationships here, and you don't know who's walking into the mall.
And then I'm just, sorry, the question quickly is, where you have those cases with parents or families, guardians who are not receptive or aren't willing to work with social services or get the help that perhaps the student needs, do your procedures then change? You know, do you pivot at that point? And just what I'm getting down to is the overall safety. So are your hands completely tied at that point? Because or is that in those cases, for example, and again, I'm talking hypothetically, not specifically, is the student then removed from that environment until that can be worked out somehow in order to establish boundaries for safety of everyone else?
So I guess there's two. There's the school, what the school does, and then there's what the police do in an investigation. So if someone says they're not going to let's say it's an interview, not going to cooperate, participate in that interview, exercise their rights, that conversation is over. However, that doesn't stop us from investigating. So we may not get our information that we need at that point, but we continue on and try to ascertain the information. I don't know if that answers that for you or not.
So I was, if you don't mind, I'll just speak in general. I'm not going to speak about anything specific, but when the greater the threat, the more information then you can demand. And so, I guess there's some irony in there, but it also does make sense. And that could be a neuropsych, that could be a risk assessment, that could be demanding counseling and requesting a release to talk to a counselor, making sure that everything is exhausted, the resources we have to determine whether or not someone is safe to return. The other challenge is, it's very rare that someone with a mental health issue, it rises to this a level of a threat. And, we don't have much recourse. We can't demand someone go talk to somebody. If there's a comment made about self-harm, we can demand that they're seen. But they're often discharged right away. And so, I do feel like it's really challenging to make sure we're meeting the needs of all mental health issues, but we do have a good system here in Massachusetts, but it's still, you could wait weeks to see somebody, a month to get a bed. And so it's certainly an area where we could improve as a society.
I have to say, I think part of what we've worked really hard at, and probably in reflection, are trying to figure out what was most effective. A lot of it, I'm going to keep going back to relationships and trust. even if families started uncooperative, and I'm going to say I will say in these cases that wasn't the case. But in other situations, we don't just take that first pushback and go. We work really hard to then continue to communicate our level of concern for that child, as well as the safety. Now, if there's a real safety issue, we will use every aspect of the laws and the discipline and all of that to make sure that we don't have an unsafe child here. And we've been able to really make that effective. But that we don't give up on that then either, because it is a public school. And kids have rights to be here unless they are absolutely unsafe or charged with certain things. And that's a real big rarity, especially in Concord, because our kids are here and they're ready to learn and they want to learn. So it's all about then helping everybody get on the same page about what that child needs. And I think Mike and his team and all the support staff that are around him are fairly almost relentless about that. And if the first avenue doesn't work, then we go back the second way and the third way and the fourth way. If we're not sure of safety, then that becomes a disciplinary piece first while we do the other things. It's working with families and helping them meet where they're at, because that's ultimately how we're going to be effective about it.
I probably should clarify, you mentioned that, I'm not, when I talked about people not cooperating, I'm not saying that occurred in the two incidents that we're talking about here. You know, quite often, and I'm talking generally, someone's in some type of crisis or something, you know, quite often parents are very cooperative and have their son or daughter cooperative as well. But there are times that doesn't occur. I mean, I think, again, when the relationships that we have with people when they come into the police station is that they understand, working with the schools, is that we do have interests of the child and their well-being and their future and our forethoughts of that.
Thank you.
Carol. Carol, I currently have a senior at the high school, and I think my question's going to cover Tom and Joe and maybe Lori. First off, how during the Alice drills and or in a situation, are you aware of students that would need support navigating the building, stairways, maybe students who can't use stairways who need help getting taken out of the building, and also not just physical, but where students have learning challenges where they may not be able to assess the situation, again, during Alice drills, which is preparing them because they may not be able to comprehend what's going on, and how are we supporting those students?
I'll grab that one. We work directly with the teachers that support those kids, so they know when it's coming anyway, and then we work with them to be sure that individual kids are getting what they need. So we work really hard at that so that the Alice drill is not disruptive or in any way negative, and that may take different forms depending on the individual situation.
But if there is an emergency situation and we have a student that uses a wheelchair, or even a student who's in crutches for a period of time, whatever it may be, is the police and the fire department aware of those students and that we need to have supports to get them out of the building? Or is a teacher assigned because we're conclusive classrooms, so they may not be in the same place?
It often,
I'm just trying to get at that level of question of, like, as parents, what should I be thinking of?
We would get our information from Scott. For a drill, we would get our information from Scott, and he knows the kids. So before we do a drill, he typically would fill us in on anything like that. And if there was a kid that needed assistance, we would assign people to do that. This hasn't happened yet, but we have been made aware of.
Think about it.
Right, but we have been made aware of kids that may have a special need or need special assistance, and that information comes from the school resource officers to us, because they have the expertise with them. They have the knowledge of who needs that kind of help.
The kids that are immobile with their teacher, one-on-one tutor or something like that, and Dr. Tom Keene and I work closely on that, those parents have been reached, and they say, we do our drill, if there is a real incident, those students know that they're going to be confined to a room, and they're probably, their option is going to be a barricade only. And the tutor and the teacher knows that. And the parents know that. We had one that graduated last year. We have one now, and I have the students in my cell phone. So they know if something, they can call me. And I have the students in my cell phone. And Dr. Keene has assigned himself and a backup person for the student that's in that wheelchair.
Their schedules are known, every schedule is known, and it's also anyone who is on crutches or immobile is the nurse is aware. So it is, we're very much aware of that.
Along those same lines, when we do a fire drill, like in the younger schools, we're aware of the kids that may be a little bit freaked out by it, and, that's not our goal. Our goal is to teach them how to get out of the building. So we will do what we need to do to accommodate them by working with their teacher, working with the principal. So we are aware of that, and we do strive to meet those needs.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would love to know if there's a plan to talk to the students about any of this at any point, reassure them even generally. When this happened, we were caught up in the rumor mill, and I tried to reassure, but I carried no weight. Whereas I feel like having it come from people that they trust and respect at school, teachers they know, it would carry a little bit more weight. And I didn't know anything.
Right. We've been talking, Mike and I, about an advisory session coming up. We are admittedly going slow, so we do it right, which is why it hasn't happened yet, but that's been this past week's conversation of when we could. We want to do it in a smaller setting. We don't want to bring them all in the auditorium and have some grand. So we're leaning to the advisory model where it's small groups and an adult, but that also means we need time to get the adults comfortable with the conversation and how they bring it to the kids.
On the heels of that was the question, I happened to be with a lot of kids that weekend, I don't know why, but they were wondering, is someone going to talk to us other than our parents, who don't, they don't listen to anybody. And then the other thing was, if these students come back, how will we know that they're okay?
We wouldn't let anybody back in that we
not
felt was a
okay.
threat to the school, just.
But even our teenage kids understand that mental health isn't something that's just a quick fix,
But there's also some assumptions in that, and so I'm not going to speak specifically about this case, but I'll just say again, we wouldn't let somebody back in if we didn't feel.
So you can reassure them of that.
Yeah, so it is a really delicate balance, and there's actually a school of thought that you wouldn't have an assembly to address it because you're making and so we did a little bit of a litmus test of trying to figure out. They do get the emails, which they don't read. Which is a challenge. I had a young man in my office just yesterday, actually. His email got hacked. He goes, I'm just going to admit it. I'm a junior. I've never read my email. So it definitely wasn't me. I said, that's great. And so we definitely knew amongst a group of sophomores that they were all discussing it, right? And so we did have a few advisories bring it up in other grades. And by and large, the kids were like, huh, what? And so then there's no perfect calculus. I think we can make a really compelling argument that you should have some really strong messaging and let everybody know. And I think you can also make a really compelling argument that it's probably better to just let it sit. So I don't know the perfect answer.
Trying to thread the balance.
I was with all these kids and they had been told, go to counseling if you're worried. And that was, I don't mean to offend anybody. I believe in counseling, but they said, that's not happening.
Yeah.
So I guess I would turn the question to you. So what would you recommend we do in that
I
situation?
honestly didn't know, which is why I'm here.
Yeah, great.
There's no perfect.
So the direction we're going is advisory in a more generic discussion, not about those two incidents, other than to assure kids they're safe. But we do want to open the discussion out. We want to remind them, if you need help, there's people here to help you. If you're in trouble, don't say certain things because it just makes it worse. How do we engage with them is a huge thing for us.
I'd like to take a second to answer.
Yeah, please.
Because I think as parents, we're the first line of worries, questions, and anxieties for our kids. And if they're bringing them to you, that's a good sign. You want those discussions to happen. That means they're thinking about it, they trust you, they're processing it. And a lot of what we need to do is just listen and ask them reflective questions. How are you feeling about it? What do you think about it? To get them reflecting and considering and slowing down and evaluating some of it for themselves and putting the brakes on before the rumor mills go. Working with a lot of parents, one of the worst things as parents we can do is a lot of questioning that sends a message that we're anxious and we're scared and that actually transmits the fear system, but it doesn't engage everyone's thoughtful reflection. And I think what I'm really hearing a lot from all of you is the slowing down and going thoughtfully and asking questions and listening can actually put the brakes on the whole process. And we parents are the ones that can continue the rumor mill or can start slowing things down and reflecting, sharing things like, let's really see what we hear, keep me posted, do you want me to call the school and ask some questions? It's important that we be part of transmitting thoughtful, clear information, and if we don't have it, showing the kids how you go about collecting it, who you reach out to. The rumor mills oftentimes fuel a lot of the fear and panic.
I'm going to go there first and come back. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that one of the things I thought was the reintroduction of one of the kids who wasn't clear whether they were involved or in what way they were involved. That felt really just weird and disruptive. It seemed like the teachers didn't know what was going on. It seemed like the kids knew something was up, and they were really kind of freaked out that this kid had been reintroduced back into class. So I think a conversation with the kids who have kids in those classes would have been really useful, because I think they were like, are we safe? I don't even know what's going on at this point.
So Miss, with all due respect, I would put that in the category of the rumor mill.
So that kid wasn't involved at all.
Which would,
I'm not going to speak about a specific kid, but I would say that is in the rumor mill.
All right.
Yeah.
So just on the, ways to disseminate the information, should we not say anything? Should there be a big, assembly? And it sounds like you want to go, if you go at all, with the advisory model. It just seems if you're going to do that the advisors should sort of be trained, queued up, because this happened, 3 times I'm aware of. I know there's 2 we're talking about, but I think there was I think a couple of years ago, maybe. And so if they're ready, they can go and disseminate that information fairly quickly. But if you have to sort of, go over it and think about it, then the rumor mill will start up, right? So like, the more they're ready when the time comes, just however you want to introduce it in the advisory, at least they would have be reading from the same script.
Thank you. I'm going to go back there, just give it.
I want to echo what she was saying, because our daughter was most concerned, I have a freshman, and our daughter was most concerned with the rumor mill, which you were saying was somebody being reintroduced back into the school. So I think, going slow with no messages to the students about what's going on can actually contribute to the rumor mill a little bit more than anything else going on. And I like the idea of advisory, but then I also think that he's saying that we need to have a very common script so that the rumor mill doesn't get out of control and we don't have different information going out. And I'm really more in favor of little bits of information sooner in the process to help with anxiety. Because as parents, we can help the kids reflect. We can do all that, but I think the anxiety is really coming out of a lack of information, a lack of knowing what's going on, especially when they hear that somebody's coming back into the school. Because that was the rumor that was going around from what I heard from my daughter. And they have no information about this. Is this kid safe? Is this kid not safe? We don't know. And that to me drove a lot more of the anxiety than anything that she could have reflected on herself.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to take that feedback really, really seriously and try to figure out how that works within the other things you're probably sick of hearing about our limitations and what we're allowed to share. So I hear you totally, and I will certainly, we will give that a lot more thought on how perhaps those kids in the closer spheres might need more reassurance. Again, I guess I will also ask that if you've got an anxious child in this, you've got to help us to know where those anxieties are, because we also expect that it doesn't mean that there's a whole class, not everyone in the classroom may feel that same way. And if we can't share much, we could actually make it worse rather than better. So I will certainly keep processing, Mike and his team and all of us will keep processing how to better meet that need for reducing kids' stress. But I also just keep encouraging, let us know so we can help you know a little bit more perhaps, and then help your child feel better. So
I was surprised that some kids chose not to go to the assembly that week for this reason. Kids that you wouldn't say had anxiety.
Right.
They just were not going to go into that assembly.
So we heard a bit of that, and we were as close as we thought we could be to that, to try to address those kids if we knew the anxiety existed. That was all rumor mill gone totally amok at that point, which we did get privy to. And tried to send the message that everything is safe and we're having an assembly as normal, and any kids, very few, frankly, that I know of individually did we have an opportunity to address. So we tried to send the message that all was good and safety was intact.
And so that, and just to be clear, that was a musical, that was not it was not an assembly addressing school violence.
No, that was a.
And we did it at the police on site.
Something fun things.
Just
yeah.
to address the concern and the rumor mill, and we were all in there. We had heavy presence. And just speaking in general terms, I would say that we would not let somebody in the school that we felt was a threat to themselves or student safety in general. And, again, and speaking in general terms, not saying anything specific, but, oftentimes kids can make mistakes, and, we need to be compassionate and recognize that, that we shouldn't exclude kids for making a mistake. And I know that's not what you're suggesting, and I know that safety is on, the forefront is everyone's mind, including mine.
Is there a way to have almost like, I'm thinking an anonymous question box? Like I think about so many things that my kids, they're oftentimes, like we're talking about, they don't want to draw attention. They don't think it's a guidance counselor thing. And I know they talk to the teachers sometimes, but like, I'm wondering if there's a way they could just get these questions and you could just see where some of the trends are, because I'm wondering if maybe some of it, is that something you guys have explored, or ways that maybe?
I think you're thinking of it, we've talked more about it as a reporting system. I think you're suggesting in a way for kids to share what they're anxious about versus.
Yeah, I'm thinking just like having a box where they can just email, and even if it has to be anonymous, so that because of the whole sensitivity I think these kids have about standing out. Is there a way they could email it in, or a place they could go where they know that the question's getting out, and you're just getting a sense of where their heads are at? Because I think sometimes, for all the reasons I'm hearing, and I see it myself, they don't always know something's important, but they don't want to draw attention. It seems like there's so many different factors. They don't want to be in a group and be the one that asks.
And I don't want to minimize your point. I see the point. However, we want to just echo that they need to talk to a trusted adult, parent, staff member. I think if an anonymous tip line could probably leave us chasing ghosts quite often.
Just want to go back to the rumor mill about the person being re-entried in. One of the rumor was Officer Scott has the wrong person. It's someone else. And then there was a rumor mill about the assembly, and there was a rumor mill with another person. So in those 3 days, there was several rumors going around that were just totally out of control.
So I don't want to cut any off. I had thought this was till 8:30, so I think, and we'll continue the conversations if you would like us to, for sure, but maybe not right here tonight, maybe more in individual settings, but maybe we'll take 1-2 more and then wrap it up.
Mine's really quick. My name's Mary Sue, and I have 2 kids that have graduated high school, and I have a junior right now. And first of all, I want to say thank you to all of you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Very, very good, so much.
Thank you.
And for being here. And then I think to Ann and maybe to Scott, because I know you two have been in the Concord community for so long. I don't know the chiefs. And actually, Ms. Ryan, you've been around a long time too, right? But, you guys know this community so well, and you know the kids so well from the school. Kind of to her point of like where their heads at, where have their heads gone from 15 years ago to now that you guys have this panel? And I mean, it breaks my heart, So, I mean, nothing you guys could ever, always been supportive and everything, but what do you see at the trends, and like, how can we continue to, because I'm just bummed that kids don't have fun at high school as much as they used to. That just makes me so sad.
Well, look at the reality they're faced with.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's not like they don't know these things are happening in other places. And then, and probably the biggest thing that has changed, and certainly I think from what we see, is social media.
Yeah.
You know, it's what exacerbates everything. Yeah, it's got all kinds of great purposes, but, you know, when kids are being bullied, for instance, you know, it used to be, we all went to school. Kids were not nice to each other in school. But usually when you went home at 3 o'clock on Friday, you weren't gonna have contact with that kid until Monday. And you weren't calling up somebody else's house and saying the kind of things that people are putting in emails. And you weren't doing it 300 times over the weekend. You know, it's nothing. When we examine those cases and we print off on a kid's phone, if I say something really mean to you now, obviously that's not a good thing, or I make fun of you, or I do whatever. If you heard that 600 times between Friday and Monday, and 10 other people joined in because we're all in the same chat, these kids are putting up with a lot in terms of just their emotional energy and how really battered they are in some ways by everything that's out there. And I think as parents, that's probably our biggest job right now, is to figure out how to separate them a little bit from that, how to have those conversations, and to be in touch a little bit with what's really going on. You know, there's a series that ran all this week about what parents don't know about the kind of porn that their fairly young kids see online. I mean, the reality is life is very different for them, and it is harder in many, many ways. And I think as parents, to be able to give them a safe place, to be able to have those reflective conversations, to teach them to be reflective rather than I just saw a tweet, I saw 7 tweets, 3 people sent me a video of it. It's a real challenge.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I had a few different things. One is statistically, there's an increase there's an increase in hate speech in our country in the last few years. That's a little bit of an additional shift on top of social media and the smartphone. And some of that speaks to how we all manage our civil discourse, which is why it's really important we're all here and we're conversing and talking. The kids experience and see what is reflected to them in media, what they read, what they hear. And so part of us modeling how to deal with conflict, how to deal with anger, how to deal with feeling excluded, how to speak about it, they're going to get that from our capacity too. The other piece, I think, the social media piece, we're just as vulnerable to it as our children. And we forget that actually, I think they and we are learning this media at the same time. And in some ways, there's a lot happening that's very hidden now. And however much you can be transparent with your child about how you're using your media, how you're filtering it, as much as you can, having full access to your child's social media at all times so that it's a transparent mechanism for a while. At this point, the pediatric national organization has really recommended smartphones not start until 9th grade, mostly because the brain of a child is not developed to counteract the genius of marketing to get our attention. And we all can tell, I'm sure everyone in this room has probably looked at their phone when they knew it was not safe in their car. And you're thinking, oh, just this one time. But they're geniuses at pulling our attention away, and our kids are way more vulnerable because their brains aren't wired to put the brakes on. And I deal with those I see text chains from kids who've been ostracized or bullied that come into my practice and are in treatment for quite a while afterwards. And it's just out of context in print when the child can review it and keep stimulating themselves with what they're hearing. And we all probably know that. That might have been part of what spread the rumor mill so quickly, was the devices. And we don't even know it's been transmitted. This is a huge ongoing issue. And we're the front lines, every one of us.
Is that a good place to end it? If you have more you want to talk with us about, by all means come over or call Mike and I or any of these folks here, but we hope this was helpful, and we'll keep the dialogue going.
Thank you.
Thank you.